Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 13th of June 2025. We're going to start this Ukraine military aid video with going to the EU. Ukraine has received an additional 1 billion euros from the EU, drawn from frozen Russian assets, says Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal. That's good news. It marks a fifth tranche of macro financial assistance under the ERA initiative. The funds will be used to cover key state budget expenditures. So I gather this will not be used to purchase weapons. This is frozen Russian assets being used to underwrite Ukraine's financial position, really. They are in financial dire straits, there's no doubt about that, and they need as much help as they can get, and that those frozen Russian assets are of course going to be super useful. Now Germany hopes to provide, and I've reported on this before, we're just going to go into a little bit more detail about this, 9 billion in support to Ukraine, said Defense Minister Boris Pistorius when he visited Ukraine just the other day. Berlin initially planned 4 billion in aid for 2025. It then got raised to 7 billion and now aims to add another 1.9 billion. Exactly what I said previously, that the Germans often start with a baseline, or they always start with the baseline, then they add to it, but people react to the baseline thinking it's much lower than the year before, but they start with kind of half the amount as the year before as your base, and then add depending on what the needs are, what the finances are, etc, etc. So that's now going even higher than previously thought. 1.9 billion euros of extra funding for assistance. They will also co-finance long-range weapons production for Ukraine. There's lots of rumours about this. I would love it if Germany are going to be involved in developing ballistic missiles and cruise missiles for Ukraine. So it could be that they've said no to Taurus, and we're going to come on to that again. They've said no to Taurus because actually they are going to help Ukraine to fairly quickly, you would expect, design and manufacture their own cruise missiles that can do similar damage, so that Germany isn't, I don't know, blamed if the Taurus is used to strike something super important for the Russians, or probably more likely they don't want that exact German technology, or it might have ITAR, it might have these restrictions on the weapons so that they can't export them to Ukraine without the say-so of the US, and the US is saying no, or whatever the reason is. They might not have enough of them and they don't want to restart the manufacturing. Whatever the reason is, Germany is not entertaining giving more Tauruses to Ukraine, but they are funding long-range weapons. Now, the previous claim was this concerned drones like the Luti drone and the Bars drone, so on and so forth, but I don't know. I'm not wholly sure exactly what that financing pertains to. Now, no Taurus for Ukraine, as has been previously discussed. Here is the actual footage concerning the claim.
Пане міністре, до вас перше питання. Ми дуже вдячні за підтримку Німеччини, яка наразі є, але не можемо не спитати.
We cannot help but ask, given the intensification of shelling the Ukrainian cities and
зважаючи на те, як за останній тиждень тільки посилилися обстріли усіх українських міст, Києва зокрема, чи розглядає
over the past week, are you considering supplying Taurus missiles?
Ви поставки Таурусів нам?
Da Sie mir eine Frage gestellt haben, ob wir das in Erwägung
In response to your question about whether we are considering it, my answer is no.
ziehen, lautet meine Antwort nein.
Are you considering sending Taurus to Ukraine? We are not considering it. Some people have said, well, it could be because they've already given some, and so they're not considering it anymore. It's done and dusted. I think that would be highly unlikely. It appears they're not considering it at the moment, and we just don't know the reason for that. It's probably the same reason as they didn't, as to why they didn't provide them previously under Olaf Scholz's government. That rationale is not going to change. What has changed is the government has changed, and Friedrich Merz might not have had access to some of the technical, military-specific data that was necessary to make the judgment on Taurus. So, as being an opposition leader, could say, "Yeah, we're gonna provide Taurus straight from day one. It's going to be on the cards," type thing. And then he gets in, and then he's told what for, and he's like, Boris Pistorius, I'm not sure though, because had he not previously been somewhat in favour of it? Anyway, they're not being considered. So that's that. Germany's assistance will continue. There are things we are very much counting on, says Zelensky. We've agreed to additional investments in production. Our country can produce weapons worth $30 billion. However, there's currently a gap because Ukraine does not use 40% of its capabilities. So there's a 40% funding gap there in terms of what it can produce. So German aid to Ukraine wades in with his breakdown of everything that's going on here. This is quite a big breakdown, as you can see. We'll come to the no Taurus. IRIS-T is important to begin with. Firstly, I'd like to comment on IRIS-T SLM and start with a disclaimer. The Ukrainian-German translation provided by the German MOD spoke of spare parts for the IRIS-T, whereas none of the articles I read spoke of this, but referred to deliveries of complete fire units. I will therefore simply give an assessment of both to be on the safe side. According to the Ukrainian president, deliveries are secured for the next 3 years. That would be 27 or 2028, depending on whether the current year is included. In the case of the fire units, this would not really be a surprise. At present, Germany has delivered 6 fire units to Ukraine and has pledged to deliver another 14 of the 14 pledged for to be delivered this year. No deliveries are confirmed so far. If this pace continues over the next few years, deliveries would already be secured until mid-2028 without additional commitments. It should not be forgotten that although the production capacity at Deal Defence is slowly increasing, numerous fire units will also be delivered to other customers over the next few years, and Germany's annual financial resources are limited. In my opinion, an enormous increase in deliveries is therefore not to be expected in any case. Again, in detail, deliveries with the current pace: end of 2025, 10 delivered. End of 2026, 14 delivered, 6 pledged. End of 2027, 18 delivered, 2 pledged. End of 2020 or mid-2028, 20 delivered and 0 therefore left to be delivered. So much for the fire units. If it really is about spare parts, and this would be the first time, as far as I can remember, that a detailed statement has been made about spare parts supply for IRIS-T SLM, etc., etc. Okay, localization of very high quality air defense systems from Germany is expected. Of course, it sounds very good at first, but the details are simply missing for a very detailed assessment. For some time now, there have been reports from the Ukrainian side that they want to localize the production of IRIS-T SLM in Ukraine. For example, in March 2025, the Ukrainian MOD announced that it had signed a memorandum of understanding with Deal Defence that paves the way for joint industrial projects. Production in Ukraine has therefore been in the pipeline for some time. I'd simply wait until further details are announced. Okay, 1.9 billion euros extra military aid for 2025. What's going on here? According to Pistorius, it's planned that Germany will provide Ukraine with an additional 1.9 billion in military aid this year. This would bring the total military aid spending for 2025 to 8.9 billion, a record figure. However, this is a subject to approval by the Bundestag and has therefore not yet been finalised, meaning just plans as of now. What I find interesting is that it's been announced that part of the 1.9 billion, which has not yet been approved, will be used to finance the long-range fire systems. However, this project was announced in May 2025 during the Ukrainian president's visit to Berlin. So that means that back then, announcements totaling 400 million, according to the Welt, had already been made that were not even financially secured. What happens if the Bundestag does not approve the additional funding? Then the already announced project would not be realised, or military aid would have to be cut somewhere else in order to finance the investments into the Ukrainian defence industry. One point is certainly not being addressed for the most part is that the fact that I find the German defence minister's visit to Ukraine really symbolic. 2 days ago, Stern published a report according to which various prominent SPD members had signed a manifesto calling for talks with Russia as an alternative for arming the Bundeswehr, among other things. It has caused a lot of outrage in Germany, and rightfully so. Pistorius, also a member of the SPD, called the manifesto a denial of reality. Now his surprise visit to Ukraine, during which he announced nothing apart from the possibility, not even a promise, of further military aid, sounds like a lot of symbolism to me, which could also have something to do with the manifesto of his party colleagues. So there's a coalition, of course, between the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, CSU, and with the SPD. The SPD, previously the party that was running in a coalition with other parties, the Green Party and the Liberal Party. But they... anyway, I forget their name. They were in coalition. Then Olaf Scholz's SPD went into coalition with the CDU, and there are members of the SPD who have got connections to Russia going back in time. And although Germany have been really supportive of Ukraine, there are still elements there that need sort of flushing out, and they are obviously giving the government a hard time in that respect. Now, the Taurus situation. At the end of the press conference, Pistorius announced that there's no consideration would be given to supplying Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. Certainly a shock for some here, while many others were already expecting it. According to Fabian Hoffman, whom I greatly appreciate for his expertise in this area, cruise missiles and drones produced in Ukraine can be used to attack up to 90% of all relevant targets on Russian territory. Systems like Storm Shadow, Scalp-EG and Taurus are primarily needed for heavily hardened or buried sites. However, the cruise missiles already supplied by France and UK are also in short supply in Ukraine, and the fact that German government is once again ruling out delivery does not make the situation any better. On the one hand, this is about maintaining capabilities in Ukraine, which would already be important enough, but on the other hand, it's also about the potential loss of face. In the opposition, Friedrich Merz demanded the delivery of Taurus from Scholz for a very long time, sometimes combined with the 24-hour ultimatum. Now he's Chancellor himself and the delivery has become less likely day after day. It looks as if there's very strong support for Ukraine at the time was just a trick because of upcoming elections. Yes, the importance of the delivery was going down for some time now, but Taurus is still very much needed in Ukraine. How can anyone ever really believe him again when he has not been serious, potentially lying about the subject so vehemently for more than a year? Like I said, loss of face. Finally, I just want to point out that over recent weeks, Merz as well as Zelensky have publicly not ruled out the Taurus delivery to Ukraine. Just 2 weeks ago, Zelensky said the delivery was still on the table, while Merz said on television that a delivery is within the realm of possibility. Even in a recently recorded piece and today published interview between Zelensky and Bilt, Zelensky said that he wished that Merz would eventually provide Taurus to Ukraine. So they still definitely want it, right? And on the same day the interview gets published, the German Minister of Defense is in Kiev and said they're not considering delivery. What happened? So we just still don't know. But anyway, thank you for German Aid for that clarification. And just on the IRIS-T, a little extra bit there. Unless a fire unit was transferred from another unit, which is highly unlikely, this picture is confirmation of the delivery of the 7th IRIS-T SLM fire unit. Another 13 of them are still pledged, of which 3 are planned to be delivered this year in addition to the one already delivered. So hopefully this unit received what is the 7th IRIS-T SLM fire unit from Germany. More on the way. So they are continually getting these into Ukraine, and they are proving very useful for the Ukrainians, as I mentioned the other day. Although the claim here is that 7 cruise missiles were shot down during their first operation, there is a claim that 8 were shot down in 30 seconds from an IRIS-T. So that's absolutely incredible. Right. Kyiv Independent reports that Germany will boost Ukraine's energy efficiency fund with 18 million euros to expand support for Ukraine's energy independence. So that's good. Thank you, Germany, again. Now, the other day I reported that, well, first of all, Israel, fairly topical country, had apparently already delivered Patriot systems with an S to Ukraine. That was according to the ambassador. Then the Israeli, I think, defense forces came out and said that is not true. So there was a denial of what the ambassador had said. JMT Politico, and of course take this with a pinch of salt, but he's been out there in Ukraine. He said 100% opposite. I know some have arrived recently, in other words, Israeli Patriot PAC-2 systems have arrived recently in Ukraine that were in Israel, but I cannot get enough facts, at least, about how many they received. But I do have confirmation from the Ukrainian Air Force that Israeli Patriots have arrived. I was told 2, and then at least 2 more were coming that the source knew of. Some 100 odd PAC-2 missiles were also received and were still in commission. I guess there were more missiles, but they were expired and needed a refurbishment. The source has no idea if they would receive the rest of the PAC-2 missiles. So I said, is it okay to share this? Sure, I know there are at least 2 there, and I didn't name anyone, so you can if you want. I'm at least sure of 2 systems and missiles. I know the person well, Ukrainian. I'm yet to receive bad info or intel from them. So it could well be that 2 of them are out there, 2 more may be on the way, as according to JMT Politico's sources there, but of course, pinch of salt. Right, Ukraine's Navy, and by the way, that's brilliant if so, because Patriots are very good. Of course, they're not the PAC-3 capable of taking out ballistic missiles, but still very capable. Ukraine's Navy's future lies in automation, says Mykola Sherbakov, the commander of the Sea Guard vessel. Quote, a fleet is always very expensive. Small platforms with modular weaponry, missiles and air defences. That's a path to success, he added. Yeah, I think these Magura V7, bigger Sea Baby type drones, going out with man pads on that can shoot down airplanes and helicopters, together with, machine gun platforms and drone platforms as well. You don't have to have a big navy with these huge ships sailing around the Black Sea. That's not functionally so useful for the Ukrainians. They need to be able to take out the Russian shipping and air force in the Black Sea area, and indeed some of the ground material along the coast of Crimea. Now, you can do that with all of the aforementioned drones and, of course, potentially torpedo drones and ones that can go underwater and cause all sorts of damage, either to the Kerch Bridge or to the Black Sea Fleet in Novorossiysk. So, yeah, automation is the way forward. Now, Ukraine has unveiled its new strike reconnaissance drone, the Bulava, described by Minister Mikhailo Fedorov as the Ukrainian answer to the Russian Lancet. The Bulava is capable of precisely hitting targets deep behind enemy lines, including electronic warfare systems, air defense assets, and other high-value objects. It can engage both stationary and moving targets and transmits real-time footage of its strikes. So there's long been talk about a Ukrainian response to the Lancet, which has been a very widely used Russian kamikaze drone. This Bulava is also an X-Wing type drone, that kind of configuration, so taking from the Lancet. I don't know what advantage that conveys, having the wings in that configuration. I know that Andrew Perpetua previously, I don't know if the Bulava might be that fixed wing one, actually, not come with an X-Wing. Oh no, there's another one there. I don't know if they're talking about that's a Lancet and this is our Bulava, which is fixed wing. But anyway, the Bulava there is the answer to the Lancet, they claim. What I was going to say is that, yeah, there's a fixed wing again there. No, and then that's X-Wing. Anyway, Andrew Perpetua earlier on in the war had talked about seeing quite a bit of footage of Russians flying Lancets with their X-Wings, but they have this kind of drift that happens. He says there's a bit of a disadvantage for them. I guess they can get caught in a cross drift, where when you have flat wings like that, they're not acting like a sail. But if you have the X-Wing, then that you can blow that sideways, arguably more easily. There's more air resistance from the sides. And that means it can maybe be blown off course more easily. And he was, I don't know what the reason was, but Andrew was saying that there was loads of footage of these Lancets doing a bit of a drift, and actually he was saying it makes them harder to control. There might even be a lag with them, right? But harder to control, and so they ended up missing. There's an awful lot of footage of Lancets missing. At least there was earlier on in the war, so that could be part of the reason. Okay, a Ukrainian improvised directional landmine uses a metal container with a layer of explosive plastic or TNT on the bottom. A layer of fragmentation elements of whatever ball bearings, screws, or nuts are available, held in place by polyurethane foam. In other words, I guess that you have an explosive on the bottom, you load it up with a bunch of kind of foam, a bit like that foam you can use in DIY to block in gaps in places, and then you plug it in and have some kind of trigger for it, and it's a directional shrapnel mine there. I wonder if a hole is drilled in the side for an MUV or electrical fuse. Another example uses TNT demolition blocks with a layer of steel nuts, as you can see there. More, I guess, innovation, or taking an already well-known kind of mechanism and just, I guess, making up from scratch there, rather than buying these for 10 times as much money already made up from defense manufacturers. Okay, NATO is expanding its satellite surveillance capacities to scan large swathes of land, enabling the alliance to monitor military movements in Ukraine and on Russia's borders with its eastern members, according to the top commander Pierre Vandier and Bloomberg there stating that. And that's significant. So NATO may be picking up the tab or helping out where the US might be pulling back or adding on to capabilities. This is what we want to see, NATO helping as much as possible there. And NATO is also to strengthen missile defenses in Eastern Europe to counter Russian threats, according again to Bloomberg. For the first time, member states of NATO are reportedly considering combining the alliance's ballistic missile shield with other integrated missile defense assets. There's a lot of call for Europe to work more closely together. We've seen the Finns and Norwegians and Swedes working together with their air forces to make efficiencies. It won't be so expensive, and you can share expertise. So we're really good flying this aircraft and doing that. You're really good at flying that aircraft, and if we work together, then we get all of those capabilities in together, which is kind of like how NATO works. No one's relying on just themselves, and if you pull together, you have a greater capability and a much greater capacity. But NATO wanting to strengthen those missile defenses in Eastern Europe, there could be just a lot more call for European nations to work much more closely together. The only problem is you're only as good as your last government, right? And if you then suddenly get a Viktor Orban in charge of your government, you're relying on that. It's a bit like what's happened with the US, where many nations have been relying on the US for defense procurement and the umbrella of American defense in and of itself. And then suddenly they switch sides, or there's some kind of political upheaval, and you're like, oh, we can't rely on them now. Oh dear, now we don't have an active defense industry that supports us in this way because we relied on the US for so long, etc., etc. So it's great to see Europe work closer and closer together, but there always has to be an understanding or a contingency in place just in case one of the nations implodes. Okay, now a bit of an extended section here on guided glide bombs. Now, I am seeing, and lots of people are reporting this, Noel reports as one actually, so much footage on a daily basis coming from the Ukrainians concerning their guided glide bombs being used released from often older aircraft like the MiG-29, still very active in using these. So here, Ukrainian MiG-29 executed a precise strike on a Russian drone control center and ammunition depots in the Zaporizhia direction. These are significant explosions, and these guided glide bombs are becoming ever more useful for the Ukrainians. I'm just seeing so much footage of them being utilized and with great success as well. So I just want to know how many they have. Well, not really. I mean, the numbers themselves aren't particularly useful unless you've got greater context. But just, have they got these bombs with their guidance kits coming to them sustainably over a long period of time going forward, the Ukrainians? Kyiv Independent reported that France is sending Ukraine more AASM Hammer bombs. Here's what they can do against Russian forces. And this is a piece from fairly recently, May the 5th. So apparently they are manufacturing the French 1,200 AASM Hammer bombs for Ukraine in 2025. So that's 100 a month. They were upping it to 50 a month. If you remember, it was going to be 600 were given. There's going to be 6 months worth of 50 a month. And now they've obviously seen how useful these bombs are, and they are providing 100 a month, and the Ukrainians are using them very, very effectively. So what is a guided glide bomb? A glide bomb is a standard air-dropped bomb modified with wings and a navigation system that allows it to be launched from distance rather than directly over the target. They're far from new technology and date back to World War II. But yeah, other nations have developed their own versions. But converting a dumb bomb an unguided one into a smart bomb can cost as little as $20,000, making it a much cheaper alternative to cruise and ballistic missiles that cost millions of dollars to produce. They're really basic, says Fabian Hoffman. All you need is a glide system that allows a bomb to fly for some distance and then integrate that with a satellite navigation receiver. And that's pretty straightforward. But of course, they can be interfered with electronically. Guided glide bombs, unlike missiles, do not have a propulsion system. They do not generate much heat and are therefore largely immune to interception by infrared homing missiles, like the AIM-9 Sidewinder or the FIM-92 Stinger. So that is one of the advantages of using them. The range of the weapons also allows the Russian fighter jets to launch them. So this is when the Russians use them to launch them to stay out of range of Ukraine's advanced air defense systems, such as the Patriot. So basically now, and the Russians are extending the range of their guided glide bombs to be sort of 90 kilometers, which means that they can release them much further back and they can still hit their target. And actually, if you're out of range of air defenses, then you can fly much higher. If you fly much higher, the range increases because you're releasing them from much higher, so they go further. Whereas at the moment, what you see is that the planes have to fly quite low to defend themselves, protect themselves against air defenses, and then they bank up really steeply, and then they can release the bombs with that steep angle upwards. But it's not as good as flying at a really high height to release them at, say, 35,000 feet. That's what you want, but unfortunately you're not going to get, because it's too dangerous to do that. And therefore I wonder what the actual effective range of these bombs are for both sides, to be honest. So the AASM are more accurate and sophisticated than their Russian counterparts. Oh no, they're talking about the US supplied ones here, but anyway, both are more accurate and sophisticated than their Russian counterparts. But Ukraine's arsenal is much more limited, and Russian forces have developed their own electronic countermeasures designed to specifically disrupt their accuracy, rendering them largely ineffective. This happened. Oh, that's a GLSDB. So the GLSDB is a ground launch version of these. So you take a dumb kind of rocket or munition and a small bomb, and you attach a guidance kit and wings to them, and you fire it out, and then it glides in much the same way as what end up being called JDAMs for the Americans. These dumb bombs with guidance kits. So the AASM Hammer, highly agile modular munition extended range bomb, is in essence the same as all the other glide bombs, wings attached to a dumb bomb and a navigation system. Developed by French company Safran, it has become a weapon of choice for Ukraine's air force thanks to its high accuracy and resistance to electronic warfare, Russian electronic warfare, according to Le Parisien. It can be enhanced with infrared and laser guidance, and is specifically designed to function in GPS-denied environments. In other words, it's incredibly difficult to jam. All of this makes them more expensive than the cheapest glide bombs. Each unit can cost upwards of $300,000, though they're still cheaper than Storm Shadow cruise missiles at around $1 million, for example, and easier to produce. So the Ukrainians are using them really, really effectively, and there are so many videos, as I keep saying, out there of different buildings getting blown up by these guided glide bombs. But I'm trying to work out, okay, so that's 100 a month going from the French, and that equates to broadly 3 a day, a little over 3 a day. So that's, probably one aircraft kitted out on one mission. That's what you're getting from the AASMs. But then you've got the SDBs, the small diameter bombs, with their guidance kits added to them, coming from the Americans. And trying to work out what's going from them is difficult. So United States, says Janes here, back in October 2024, is to send Boeing GBU-39 small diameter bombs, SDBs, to Ukraine to better enable the country's air force to conduct standoff strikes into occupied Russian territory. The US Department of Defense disclosed the pending transfer in a wider contract notification posted online on the 30th September. That includes the foreign military sales deal for Ukraine. So and I'm sure someone can answer me here, but I don't know how many of these SDBs, these GBU-39s, Ukraine is receiving from the US and how many they are buying, how many are in previously donated packages from the US. If it's foreign military sales, then that's at least somewhat useful going forward, because the US hopefully won't want to deny Ukraine buying that kit off American enterprises. Business Insider here reports that Ukraine's getting powerful long-range glide bombs from the US that will give its F-16s a new punch. This is from September last year. The US is sending Ukraine a joint standoff weapon, an air-launched glide bomb, so JSOW. The powerful munition will give Ukraine's F-16s a new long-range weapon. Glide bombs have been heavily featuring during the war, and Russia has used them to devastating effect. Okay, so these are the JSOWs, which are the AGM-154. So slightly different than the GBU-38, and it's quite confusing as to what Ukraine have, what they use. Sometimes when you see them on socials, people say, "Oh, this is a French Hammer bomb," or "This is a JDAM," or whatever. But it's not certain that it is the case. It can be quite difficult to tell. You're kind of going on what you're told from the units. So I don't know. Put all of these together and you wonder how many the Ukrainians have and will receive. Ukraine says the aviationist is now using new 1,000-pound JDAM-ER bombs. Ukraine employed since 2023 the 500-pound JDAM-ER extended range, whose existence was well documented, while the new 1,000-pound bomb, so that's a 500-pound bomb, might have been specifically produced for the Ukrainian Air Force. 2 years after the 500-pound GBU-62. So we've got the GBU-38 and we've got the GBU-62 JDAM extended range guided bomb was first reported among the weapons being delivered to Ukraine. It now appears the country has received a new 1,000-pound variant of the weapon, whose existence was previously unknown. In fact, a recently released video shows a Ukrainian Su-27 flanker dropping two 1,000-pound JDAM-ER bombs against Russian targets. The GBU-62 has been used by both the Su-27 flanker and a MiG-29 Fulcrum, is based on the 500-pound, 227-kilogram Mark 82 bomb, while the new weapon, whose designation is unknown but could likely be the GBU-63, is based on a larger 1,000-pound or 454-kilogram bomb. So these are pretty hefty bombs. That 454 kilograms, you think an Iskander ballistic missile is 480 kilograms of explosives. Now, I don't know if it's comparable explosives, but you would assume that this isn't going to be too far off a ballistic missile. And that's pretty impressive. So then I was still like confused as to how many and what different types. So I asked Copilot, the AI for Microsoft. The US has supplied Ukraine with several types of guided glide bombs, including the GBU-39, and it has apparently a 90% success rate of striking its target. So that's really good. Also, the ground-launched small diameter bomb, which is the one shot out of launchers like a HIMARS or M142. Then we've got the AGM-154 joint standoff weapon, a long-range precision-guided glide bomb that can be launched from F-16 fighter jets. It features retractable wings and an infrared imaging sensor, making it harder for Russian air defenses to intercept. So there appears to be three types there, but two types being released from planes. But then actually the GBU-39 and 38 have been given, as well as the GBU-62. So what's going on there? What's the difference? Here we have an article in Army Recognition. Ukrainian MiG-29s deploy US JDAM-ER bombs in a strategic strike on Kursk Bridge. This is from August last year, but again saying that these older planes are able to handle these, and they're not like massively new, but in this case GBU-62 JDAM extended range bombs, underscoring the hands-on role Ukrainian forces are playing in adapting and utilizing these advanced munitions to their older planes. Yes, in terms of destructive power, the GBU-62 JDAM-ER typically converts a standard Mark 84 bomb, which weighs around 900 kilograms. That's double. That would be 2,000 pounds. You sure that's not 900 pounds? Into a guided munition. The Mark 84, known for its substantial explosive yield. Well, that's really impressive then. That if that's the case, then that is double what we've seen. So that's a JDAM JDAM-ER, the GBU-62, and I've got a page here that looks at all the JDAMs, which I eventually found. So we've got the GBU-38 over here, we've got the 62 over here. So the GBU-38, if we look at that, gives us, I don't know if there are others, I think there might be even 39s, 32s, but the 38 was a 500-pound bomb. So that is on the, not like hugely small, but it's on the smaller end of these bombs. The Mark 82 is a 500-pound bomb. So that was that the Mark 82 that was mentioned here? Mark 84 type bomb was mentioned for the GBU 62. So that's a Mark 82. So there you go, 500-pound bomb for the GBU 38. Then we come on to the JDAM-ER, and we've got the GBU 62. So if we say it here, have a look here, the JDAM, which is JDAM extended range, triples the range of JDAM, reaching up to 80 kilometers, 50 miles, when launched from high altitude. Of course, the key there is launching it from high altitude. 500-pound JDAM-ER entered service with the Royal Australian Air Force in 2016. In a similar effort, Boeing and the South Korean company developed a JDAM-ER wing kit for the 2,000-pound class JDAM weapons, the GBU-31B. Okay, the only confirmed US military application of JDAM-ER is the use of these wing kits with mines of the Quick Strike family. The designation is GBU-62, but it could be the brackets V, so I don't know. Yeah, refer to the 500-pound class Mark 62 and a 2,000-pound class Mark 64 mines, but we were hearing about the Mark 84. So yeah, I don't know. I just don't know exactly what's going on here, other than there seems to be a variety of bombs, different payloads on those of 500 pounds, 1,000 pound, maybe even 2,000-pound bombs, and that's what this article seems to indicate. And then you've got the French AASM Hammers as well, and then you've got the JSOW, these AGM variants. So 3 lots. How many they have is a good question. I did ask Copilot, and they said the exact number of GBU-39 small diameter bombs, that's only GBU-39 supplied to Ukraine by the US, is not publicly disclosed. However, the US Department of Defense has awarded Boeing a multi-year contract worth $6.9 billion to produce and deliver an unspecified number of these bombs, with deliveries expected to continue to December the 31st, 2035. So just, wow, they are obviously going to get these for a long time. And if that's part of your foreign military sales and isn't dependent on appropriations bills and whatnot, then that could be good news for the Ukrainians, that they could receive those for a long time to come. But they are using them more and more, but there just seems to be no definitive answers to how many guided glide bombs they are able to use on a monthly basis. Now, finally, we'll go to what Russia is doing, and actually we're going to talk about Iran with what's been going on concerning Israel and Iran. Iran has banned drone and missile supplies to Russia, notifying Moscow this morning of a halt to all arms deliveries, especially unreported ones, and requesting military aid. Kremlin hesitates to engage in open conflict with Israel, per Roman Cymbaluk. So that's interesting. I don't know how many weapons Iran still gives to Russia, because I think Russia's localized the construction, particularly the Shahid drones. There was talk about them receiving short to medium range ballistic missiles from the Iranians, but now Iran is full on possibly engaging a war with not only Israel but also the US. There's talk about that. Declaration of war has been, the foreign ministry for Iran said that the Israeli strikes were a declaration of war, so they're going to be wanting to retaliate as much as possible to Israel, but they're going to need as many weapons as they can get their hands on. So this is no surprise that they've stopped deliveries to Russia. That's good news for Ukraine for sure, but I just don't know how meaningful that is. and they've asked for help from Russia. And I don't think Russia is going to be particularly quick to help them, primarily because they don't have all that much kit themselves, and they're probably using everything that they manufacture, and also because of the PR there. So, yeah, who knows how that will turn out. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that's of use. Thank you for watching. A little bit more depth into the guided glide bombs, but still no real answers there. They're getting, I mean, they're definitely getting more than they were. We're seeing much more footage than they were. We know AASM Hammers have been upscaled in terms of the amount they're receiving of them. Let's hope that they can make some of their own as well and just add to that, because those guided glide bombs are so useful for hammering the front lines. You know, in the absence of being able to fly over the front lines with A-10 Warthogs and just blitz these areas, you need to be hammering, precision hammering, depots, command centers, troop accumulations. And what we're seeing more and more is are the drone operator teams, but also just blitzing the front line. These are relatively cheap. They're not super cheap compared to like just the dumb bombs themselves. But Ukraine, I think, need to lean, and they are leaning heavily into the usage of these guided glide bombs. And we're seeing much, much more footage to support that. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. Speak soon.